Mum, the main table is for Leo's key partners and influencers. It's about brand synergy. You get it. Chloe's voice was smooth, a polished stone as she said it. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the screen of her phone, her thumb a blur as she orchestrated the live stream for what she'd proudly announced were her 2 million followers. Just find a spot, she added, a vague, dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand indicating the cavernous, glittering space of Crestwood Manor behind her. Somewhere in the back. The words didn't just hang in the air, they landed on my skin like ice. Somewhere in the back. I was at my granddaughter Stella's engagement party, my only granddaughter, and I, Madison, 68 years old, widow of the man whose money had built this very moment, was being told to find a spot, like an overcoat, like a piece of unwanted luggage. My breath caught, a tiny sharp thing in my chest. I looked at her, at the flawless line of her jaw, the calculated warmth in her eyes that was reserved only for a camera lens. She had already forgotten me. Her focus shifted to a caterer holding a tray of champagne flutes. No, the flutes with the gold rim for the VIP lounge, she instructed, her voice crisp with authority. I was wearing the blue silk dress, the one Richard had bought me for our 40th anniversary, just before he got sick. He'd said it matched my eyes. Tonight, it felt like a costume from another era, its fabric heavy and suffocating. In the heat of the professionally installed lighting brand Synergy, the words echoed in my head, foreign and sharp. I looked at the main table, a long, magnificent affair draped in white linen and overflowing with white roses and eucalyptus. Laughter, bright and effortless, spilled from it. I saw my son, Leo, his hand resting on the small of Chloe's back, a proprietary gesture. He looked handsome, successful, his teeth impossibly white, as he smiled for a photo with a man who looked like he'd been born in a tailored suit. Stella, my beautiful Stella, was seated beside her fiancé, her face glowing, a diamond a little too large for her delicate finger, catching the light and throwing tiny, painful little stars into my eyes. They were a perfect photograph. Her family portrait meticulously curated for public consumption, and I was the blemish they were trying to crop out. I turned away from them, a slow, stiff pivot. The back was a vast territory. It was the land of distant cousins, of business associates not quite important enough for the main table, of hired help. I started walking. Each step felt like I was wading through something thick and invisible. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my sensible heels, erasing me further. Faces turned toward me, curious for a moment, then slid away, uninterested. They were young, vibrant, their conversations a staccato burst of brand names and vacation spots. I felt their gazes pass over me, cataloguing my greying hair, my dated dress, my existence as something not relevant to their world. I was a ghost at their feast. My journey ended at a small wobbly table, tucked behind a large, sad-looking potted palm, perilously close to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. This was it. This was my spot. The table was bare except for a single unlit candle. I pulled out the chair. It scraped against the marble floor, a loud, ugly sound in a room full of orchestrated elegance. A few heads turned. I saw a flicker of annoyance on a young woman's face before she turned back to her companion. I sank into the chair, my bones aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with age. From here, I had a perfect, heart-wrenching view. I could see them, my family, bathed in a golden light, the centre of this universe they had created. Leo raised his glass, his voice amplified by a hidden microphone, booming through the hall. He spoke of legacy, of future, of building an empire. He never once mentioned his father. the man who had laid every single brick of that foundation. He never once glanced in my direction. I was invisible. A seat in the shadows. That was my place. The kitchen doors swung open, blasting me with a wave of hot, greasy air and the frantic, high-pitched shouting of the head chef. More salmon blinis to table 3. Where are the truffle tarts? Move! The doors swung shut, cutting off the chaos, only to swing open again moments later. It was a relentless rhythm of noise and smells, garlic and stress, citrus and panic. It was a world away from the delicate perfume of the roses at the main table. This was my new sensory reality. The clatter of dropped pans was the soundtrack to my granddaughter's celebration. I watched a waiter glide past my table, his tray laden with exquisite appetizers. He served the table next to mine, smiling, before turning on his heel and heading back toward the main hall. His eyes sliding right over me, as if I were part of the potted plant. My stomach rumbled, a small, pathetic protest. I hadn't eaten since lunch, too nervous and excited for the party. Now the excitement had curdled into a cold, hard knot in my gut. A large screen flickered to life on the far wall, displaying a live feed of social media posts, tagged with Stella and James forever. I saw a picture of Chloe and Leo, captioned with heart emojis. I saw a picture of the diamond ring, captioned with 100 gasping comments. And then I saw myself. A photo, clearly taken from across the room, catching me at an unflattering angle, sitting alone at my wobbly table. The caption, posted by someone I recognized as one of Stella's bridesmaids, read, "Grandma's dress is a historical artifact, LOL." The comments started to pop up beneath it, each one a small digital stone thrown at me. OMG vintage, from the Stone Age. Is that her grandma? Tragic. Someone get her a shawl and a cup of tea, lol. #image problem. My hand flew to my mouth, but no sound came out. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was a joke, a meme at my own family's party. I looked for Stella on the screen, on the stage, anywhere. She was laughing, holding her fiancé's hand, completely oblivious. Or maybe not. Maybe she'd seen it. Maybe she was laughing too. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the last bit of air from my lungs. I felt my vision tunnel, the glittering party dissolving into a blurry, painful smear of light and sound. Then came the cake. It was a monument, 5 tiers of white fondant and cascading sugar flowers. The band played a triumphant little flourish as Stella and James made the first cut. Everyone applauded. Waiters fanned out from the kitchen, a fleet of white jackets and silver trays, carrying plates of cake to every corner of the room. They moved with practiced efficiency, weaving through the tables, depositing their sweet cargo. I watched them. I waited. My hands were folded in my lap, my posture ramrod straight. It became a silent, desperate game. Surely they wouldn't forget me. Surely my son, my own son, would ensure his mother got a piece of his daughter's engagement cake. A waiter approached my section of the room. He served the table of young people next to me, who were still giggling at their phones. He turned. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of nothing, no recognition, no instruction, just a blankness. He turned and walked away, his tray empty. I sat there, my plate as bare as it had been when I arrived. The empty, white ceramic seemed to mock me. I watched as people took their first bites, their faces blissful. I could almost taste it, the sweetness of the frosting, the soft crumb of the sponge. But my mouth was dry, and the only thing I could taste was ash. The bitterness of it coated my tongue, a phantom flavour of grief and humiliation. It was then that I heard her voice again, Chloe. She had stepped away from the main table and was standing near a marble pillar not 10 feet from me. She was speaking in a low, conspiratorial whisper to the same well-dressed man Leo had been talking to earlier. One of his key investors, I presumed. She thought she was being discreet, shielded by the pillar and the noise of the party. But the acoustics of the grand hall were strange. Her words carried, clear as a bell, directly to my lonely little table. It's just a bit of an image problem for Leo's brand, she murmured, a delicate sigh punctuating the sentence. She doesn't understand optics. I mean, the dress. It's a relic. And frankly, she's a relic. The man chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Every family has one. Yes, Chloe agreed, her voice dropping even lower, laced with a venom that was far more potent than any shout. But ours is becoming a liability. We're working on a more permanent solution, something more suitable for her. A relic. A liability. The words weren't just insults. They were a verdict, a final judgment delivered in a silk-wrapped whisper. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, at my wobbly table, by the swinging kitchen doors, and felt something inside me shift. It wasn't a crack. It was a freezing, a quiet, deep, and total freeze. The warmth I'd been clinging to, the memory of Richard's love, the hope for my family's affection, it all just solidified into a block of ice in the center of my chest. I stared at the main table, at the son who didn't see me, at the daughter-in-law who was planning my disposal, at the granddaughter who was laughing at my expense. The taste of ash was gone. In its place was the cold, clean taste of steel. My name is Madison Hayes. To my son Leo and his wife Chloe, I am a ghost who still breathes, a relic of a bygone era, collecting dust in a corner of their minimalist, sprawling, smart home. They see a 68-year-old widow, a woman whose world shrank to the size of a postage stamp, the day my husband, Richard, drew his last breath. They see frail hands, a mind softened by grief, and an inconvenient financial burden. They are not entirely wrong. My world did shrink. But a compressed spring holds the most energy. They see the gentle, forgetful old woman. They don't see the architect. And I was the architect of my own cage. Before I was a widow, I was a wife. Before I was a mother, I was a forensic accountant. My mind was a place of numbers and logic, a scalpel that could dissect a fraudulent balance sheet and lay bare the lies hidden in columns of figures. I loved the clean, cold certainty of it. A number could not lie unless a person made it. My job was to find the person. I was good at it. Very good. When I met Richard, a man whose ambition was a force of nature, I saw a life beyond ledgers. When Leo was born, I saw a universe in his tiny hands. I made a choice. I hung up my professional life like a coat I no longer needed, and I devoted myself to the beautiful, chaotic, unpredictable business of building a family. It was a sacrifice made not with regret, but with a full heart. My sharp mind was turned to managing household budgets, navigating school districts, and creating a home that was a sanctuary from the harsh world Richard so eagerly conquered every day. I built our life, board by board, memory by memory, while he built an empire. I never imagined that the son I had poured my entire soul into would one day look at me and see only a line item on his expense report. After Richard passed, the silence in our family home was deafening. Every room echoed with his absence. Leo and Chloe descended upon me with a cloud of manufactured concern. "Mum, this house is too big for you," Leo said, his hand on my shoulder, his touch feeling more like a claim than a comfort. "The upkeep, the memories. It's not healthy for you to be rattling around in here alone." Chloe, ever the polished brand manager, added, "We found the perfect solution. A beautiful, self-contained in-law suite in our new home. You'll be close to us, to your granddaughter. We'll take care of everything." Take care of everything. That was the phrase that sealed my fate. They sold my home, the one I had filled with the scent of baking bread and the sound of laughter. Or at least, that's what they told me. The proceeds, along with Richard's life insurance and my own savings, were too complex for me to manage now. Leo, with a sympathetic smile, explained that he would put it all into a trust for me, manage it, and provide me with a generous allowance to cover my small needs. It was for my own good, my own protection. And so I agreed. I allowed them to pack up my life, to condense a lifetime of love and memories into a few dozen boxes, most of which never even made it to their destination. I moved into their world. My in-law suite is a marvel of modern design. It's all white walls, brushed chrome, and cold marble floors. It has the personality of a luxury hotel room, a place designed for temporary stays, not for living. My allowance arrives on the 1st of every month, a crisp envelope with cash, handed to me by Chloe as if I were a teenager who had completed her chores. She explains my own finances to me in slow, simple terms, her voice laced with the patronizing sweetness one uses for a child or a pet. "Now, Madison, this should be plenty for your knitting supplies and little treats. Just let us know if you need anything else, but try to make it last, okay?" I nod. I look confused. I make my hand tremble slightly as I reach for the envelope. I have practiced this. I have honed the vacant look in my eyes, the slight, bewildered parting of my lips when they discuss stock portfolios or capital gains at the dinner table. I have become a master of the role they cast for me. The doddering, financially illiterate old woman, a harmless appendage to their perfect, curated life. It is a performance of painstaking precision, a mask of senility I have worn for so long it feels like a second skin. They believe it, because they need to believe it. It makes their cruelty feel like kindness, their greed feel like responsible stewardship. They built this gilded cage of theirs, but I was the one who willingly walked inside and handed them the key. They have no idea that I have my own set of keys, forged in the fire of Richard's final days. My husband was not a sentimental man. He was a financial predator, a shark in a world of minnows, and he saw the world with a chilling, pragmatic clarity. In his last year, as cancer ate away at his body, it seemed only to sharpen his mind. The fury in him was not directed at the disease, but at the future he saw unfolding. A future I, blinded by a mother's love, had refused to see. He saw the rot in our son's soul long before I did. He saw the insatiable greed in Chloe's eyes every time she looked at our home, our art, our legacy. "They're vultures, Maddie," he'd rasped one afternoon, the air thick with the sterile scent of medication. His hand, once strong enough to command a boardroom with a single gesture, was a frail, bony thing lying on the crisp white sheets. But his eyes were like chips of flint. They aren't waiting for me to die. They're waiting to pick the carcass clean. I tried to object, to defend our son. Richard, he's your blood. He loves us. He let out a dry, rattling laugh. He loves what we have. There's a difference. You built a home, I built an empire. To him, they're just assets to be liquidated. That was when the lessons began. He called them our little games. Every day, after the nurses had left, he would summon a flicker of his old strength. Our bedroom, which had become his sick room, transformed into a classroom. He didn't teach me how to balance a checkbook. He taught me how to disappear one. He taught me about shell corporations registered in jurisdictions whose names I could barely pronounce. He taught me about asset protection trusts, so labyrinthine they would make a seasoned lawyer weep. He walked me through the intricate dance of cryptographic keys, of digital wallets hidden in plain sight, of moving vast sums of money with a few quiet keystrokes, leaving no trail. This one, he'd say, pointing a trembling finger at a complex diagram he'd sketched on a legal pad. This is the Persephone account. It goes dark for 6 months of the year. Untraceable. It holds the seeds, your seeds. At first, my head swam. This was the world I had left behind, but magnified, twisted into something clandestine and predatory. It felt wrong, unseemly. Richard, why are you showing me this? This is for criminals. He looked at me and the cold fury in his eyes softened for just a moment, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. I'm not teaching you to be a criminal, Maddie. I'm teaching you how to fight one. I'm giving you a sword. Whether you use it is up to you. But I will not leave you defenseless in a den of thieves, especially when one of them is my own son. He had a sculpture commissioned, a beautiful, heavy piece of bronze in the shape of a pomegranate, its surface textured with hundreds of tiny seeds. It sat on the table by his bed, a silent observer to our lessons. It was the last thing he ever bought. He made me promise to keep it with me, always. In his final hours, when his breathing was shallow and the space between his words grew longer, he pulled me close. I was expecting words of love, a final goodbye, a tender memory. That was not Richard's way. His life was a strategy, and so was his death. His last words were not a comfort. They were an order, a transfer of power. He looked past me, his gaze fixed on the pomegranate sculpture. They are vultures, Maddie, he whispered, his voice a thread of sound. They don't deserve the legacy. They deserve the lesson. The plan, all of it, is inside the pomegranate. He took one last shuddering breath, and his eyes found mine, holding them with a terrifying intensity. When they deny you your seat at the table, he commanded, burn their world to the ground. And then he was gone. Now that bronze pomegranate sits on the cheap particle board mantelpiece in my sterile white room. It is the only thing of real substance, of real weight in this entire place. To Chloe, it's an interesting, if a bit dated, objet d'art. To Leo, it's invisible. To me, it is a promise. It is a weapon. It is the silent, patient architect of my rage, waiting for the moment when the gilded cage is no longer a sanctuary, but a launching point. They think they hold all the cards, They think the game is over. They don't understand.
I'm just letting them set the board.
The silence in their house was a language I'd learnt to speak fluently. It was a weighted, textured thing, different in every room. In the grand foyer, it was an echoing silence, magnifying the smallness of my presence. In the living room, it was a curated silence, the kind that exists only to be broken by their important phone calls or the hollow laughter of their guests. But in the kitchen during their breakfast, it was the most punishing silence of all. It was an exclusionary silence. I sat at the far end of the long, polished oak table. A piece of furniture Richard and I had bought together 30 years ago. Now it was a vast, empty continent between me and them. A single plain white ceramic plate was set for me, a stark contrast to the matching hand-painted porcelain they used. My fork was thin and lightweight, the kind you get in a cheap cafeteria set. Theirs was heavy, silver, monogrammed. The air was thick with the scent of freshly ground Ethiopian coffee, a dark, rich aroma that never reached my cup. My mug, a faded one, with a chipped rim that said "World's Best Grandma," was filled with lukewarm water from the tap, a tea bag floating sadly within it. Chloe believed caffeine was bad for a person my age, so was sugar, salt, and, it seemed, joy. I watched as she poured a stream of frothy, steamed milk into Leo's cup, her movements fluid and proprietary. She did not look at me. To look at me would be to acknowledge me, and I was not part of the morning's agenda. The market for luxury short-term rentals in Crestwood Valley is booming, Chloe said, her voice crisp and clear in the quiet room. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the screen of her tablet, which was propped up against a crystal vase of fresh-cut lilies. The analytics are undeniable. We could easily see a 30% ROI in the first year. Leo grunted his agreement, his eyes fixed on the financial news scrolling across his own phone. He shoveled a forkful of avocado toast into his mouth. Good. We need another revenue stream. The Series B funding is taking longer than I'd like. Exactly, Chloe said, leaning forward. Her voice dropped slightly, taking on a conspiratorial tone, as if sharing a delicious secret. It was the same tone she used when discussing a stock tip or a rival's misfortune. That granny flat, it's a wasted asset. It has a separate entrance, a kitchenette. It's perfect. We could list it on Airbnb, market it as a private valley retreat. It could net us an extra $5,000 a month, maybe more. The teacup in my hand felt suddenly very cold. The granny flat. My home. The small, self-contained apartment Richard had built for me, so I could be close to my family but still have my own space after he was gone. He'd personally overseen every detail, from the wheelchair-accessible shower I didn't yet need, to the large picture window that looked out onto the rose garden he had planted for me. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world that was entirely mine. What about Mom? Leo asked. His voice was hesitant, the question a small stone tossed into the smooth pond of Chloe's ambition. He didn't look up from his phone. He couldn't look at me. Chloe scoffed, a short, sharp sound like a bird's angry chirp. Leo, be realistic. It's not sustainable. Her needs are increasing. She waved a dismissive hand in my general direction, not quite looking at me, but making my presence felt as an inconvenience. We can't be expected to provide round-the-clock care. It's not fair to us or to Stella. We could find a nice, clean, state-run facility for her. I've already researched a few. There's one called Golden Meadows, just an hour away. The reviews are adequate. Golden Meadows. The name sounded like a lie. I pictured a sterile hallway, the smell of bleach and despair, a line of silent, grey-faced residents staring at a television that was always on but never watched, disposed of, like a defective appliance. The words echoed in my mind. They weren't discussing my future. They were discussing my disposal. The conversation flowed on, moving seamlessly to property management software and dynamic pricing models. I was an item on a checklist that had been ticked off, a problem that had been solved. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tepid tea. My hands were perfectly still. My face was a placid mask. Inside, a glacier was forming, a vast, cold sheet of ice, cracking and groaning under immense pressure. Richard's voice whispered in my memory, a low rumble from years ago. They see you as a piggy bank, Maddie, and when the bank is empty, they will discard the building. I had dismissed it then, accused him of being cynical. Now his words were a prophecy fulfilled. I looked at my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fears of the dark I had soothed, and I saw a stranger. A stranger who was calculating the profit margin on my displacement. I carefully placed my cup back on its saucer, the slight clink of porcelain on porcelain the only sound I made. It was a sound they did not hear. A few days later, the rain came. It was a cold, persistent drizzle that turned the sky to slate and the world to shades of grey. I found it fitting. The weather matched the landscape of my heart. I was in my small apartment, trying to read, but the words swam before my eyes. The remote for my television was missing again. Chloe often misplaced it, claiming it was for my own good, to encourage me to do more stimulating activities, like staring at the walls. I decided to take out my small bag of trash, an excuse for a change of scenery, for a breath of damp, clean air. As I stepped outside, my gaze fell upon the large blue recycling bin at the edge of the driveway, its lid slightly ajar. Something was wrong. It wasn't just filled with the usual flattened cardboard boxes from Chloe's online shopping sprees and empty wine bottles. There was a splash of faded colour. A familiar, heartbreaking sight. My photo albums. They were wedged in amongst the debris, their padded covers already dark and swollen with rain. The one on top, its faux leather cover peeling away, was open to a page I knew by heart. It was a picture of Leo, aged 6, beaming with pride as he sat on Richard's shoulders at a county fair, a half-eaten candy apple clutched in his sticky hand. Richard's face, thrown back in laughter, was turned to the sky. Now the rain was washing their smiles away, the cheap ink bleeding in rivulets of pale blue and faded red, like tears. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, wounded gasp. I stumbled forward, my slippers sinking into the wet grass. I didn't care about the rain plastering my thin hair to my scalp or the cold seeping into my bones. I plunged my hands into the bin, the damp cardboard and cold glass scraping my skin. I pulled them out, one by one. My wedding album, the white satin now a dirty grey. The album chronicling Leo's entire childhood, from his first steps to his high school graduation. The vacation albums, filled with images of a family that no longer existed. A family that had once been bound by love, not by financial convenience. Madison? What on earth are you doing? You'll catch your death of cold. Chloe's voice cut through the drumming of the rain. She stood on the covered porch of the main house, a silk robe wrapped tightly around her, a mug of what I was sure was hot, fragrant coffee in her hand. She wasn't angry. She wasn't apologetic. Her expression was one of mild annoyance, as if she'd found me tracking mud on her clean floors. My pictures, I whispered, my voice hoarse. I held up a dripping album, a photograph of me, holding a newborn Leo slipping from its plastic sleeve and fluttering to the wet ground. Chloe, my memories. She waved a dismissive hand, the gesture so casual, so utterly indifferent, it was more violent than a slap. Oh, that? Just decluttering, Madison. Honestly, those things were taking up a whole shelf, gathering dust. It's so much cleaner now. Besides, she added, taking a delicate sip from her mug, everything is in the cloud now, anyway. I had an intern scan them ages ago. It's all digitized. Much more efficient. Her cloud. My life. My marriage, my son's childhood. Reduced to a string of ones and zeros on a server I couldn't access. A cloud, as distant and untouchable as the one that was weeping over me. These weren't just images. They were tangible proof. Proof of a time when Richard's arm was warm around my shoulders, when Leo's hand was small and trusting in mine. They were the anchor of my identity, and she had thrown them in the trash with the week's garbage. My memories weren't in her cloud, they were bleeding into the gutter. I stood there in the cold rain, clutching the sodden, ruined books to my chest, and I felt a profound and terrifying stillness settle over me. The grief was a physical weight pressing the air from my lungs, but beneath the grief, something else was taking root, a cold, hard resolve. She had tried to erase my past. She and Leo were planning to erase my future. They thought I was a relic, a ghost already. They had no idea that a ghost can still learn how to haunt. I turned without another word and walked back to my empty apartment, leaving the rest of the albums to dissolve in the rain. I had all the proof I needed. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place about a week later. The air in the house had been tense for days. I could hear Leo and Chloe arguing behind closed doors, their voices sharp and strained. Words like insolvent, default, and liquidation drifted down the hallway to my room. Leo's tech startup, his great ambition, was hemorrhaging money. He was a ship taking on water. And he was looking for anyone, to use as a bucket. He came to my apartment one evening. It was a calculated visit, I could tell. He hadn't set foot in my rooms for months, not since he'd come to tell me they were selling Richard's old car, because its emissions were no longer up to code. He was trying to look casual, but his shoulders were tight, and a fine sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He carried a small, grease-stained paper bag from a local bakery. "Hey, Mum," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his terrified eyes. "Brought you one of those cinnamon rolls you like." He knew I wasn't allowed sugar. Chloe monitored my diet like a prison warden. The offering was a clumsy, pathetic gesture, a child's attempt at manipulation. I played my part, smiling weakly. "Oh, Leo, that's so thoughtful. Come in, dear." He sat on the edge of the stiff armchair, the only other piece of furniture in the small room, besides my bed and a small table. He placed a heavy-looking portfolio on his lap. He made small talk, asking about my health, feigning interest in the book I was reading. It was a painful, hollow performance. Finally, he took a deep breath. "Listen, Mum, there's some paperwork I need you to look at. Just some routine estate updates. The lawyers are just, crossing the T's and dotting the I's on Dad's accounts. It's just a formality." He slid a thick stack of papers from the portfolio and placed them on the table in front of me. He handed me a pen, his own expensive, heavy fountain pen. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. As my hand hovered over the page, the training Richard had given me, the years I had spent as a forensic accountant before I became a wife and mother, all of it came flooding back with crystalline clarity. My mind was a steel trap. I didn't see a jumble of legalese designed to confuse an old woman. I saw exactly what it was. The specific font of the bank's letterhead, the boilerplate language, the carefully worded clauses. It wasn't an estate update, it was a personal guarantee, a document that would leverage all of my remaining assets, the small protected trust Richard had left solely in my name, the one thing Leo and Chloe hadn't been able to touch, as collateral against a bridge loan for his failing company. A loan for $5 million. I saw the faint tremor in his hand as he pointed to the signature line. Just right here, Mum. He was terrified, he was desperate, and he was willing to sacrifice his own mother to save himself. He was betting everything on my frailty. On my supposed ignorance, on the senile, helpless old woman I had so meticulously pretended to be. I looked up from the paper and into his eyes. For a split second, I searched for the little boy with the candy apple, for the teenager I had taught to drive, for the son I loved. I saw nothing, only the cold, hard glint of desperation. He had already thrown me into the recycling bin. This was just the final act of disposal. A slow, cold power filled me. This was it. This was the moment Richard had prepared me for. When they refuse you a seat at the table, he had said, burn their world to the ground. This document wasn't a cage, it was a key, his key. I let my hand tremble. I squinted at the page as if I couldn't read the words. Oh my, so many big words, Leo. Are you sure this is all right? It's fine, Mum. It's just a formality, he repeated, his voice strained. Just sign. I took the pen. I let my fingers seem clumsy and stiff. I lowered the nib to the paper and began to sign my name. I didn't sign it with the crisp, confident script of Madison the accountant. I signed it as Madison the victim. I let the lines waver. I made the M look weak and uncertain. I allowed the final letter of my name to trail off into a shaky, unconvincing scrawl. It was a masterpiece of forgery. My own signature rendered as a perfect imitation of helplessness. It was a signature that screamed coercion. A signature that was a confession. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a minute. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was sickening. He thought he was brilliant. He thought he had won. Thanks, Mum. You're a lifesaver, he said, quickly gathering the papers before I could have a second thought. He gave me a quick, awkward hug, his body stiff. The smell of his fear and his expensive cologne filled my senses. Then he was gone, leaving the untouched cinnamon roll on the table like a token payment for my soul. I sat there in the silence of my room, the greasy bag a monument to his betrayal. I looked down at my hand. It was no longer trembling. It was perfectly, terrifyingly steady. He had just handed me the sword. And he had no idea I knew exactly how to use it. The next morning, the sun cut weak, apologetic stripes across the living room floor. I was dusting. It's what women like me are expected to do. We dust, we fade, we occupy quiet corners. My hand moved over the polished surface of a side table, the cloth collecting the invisible shed a life leaves behind. And then my eyes landed on it. The pomegranate. Richard's last gift to me. A ceramic sculpture, lumpy and oversized, painted in garish shades of red and purple. Chloe called it a monstrosity. She tried to, accidentally, knock it over a dozen times. But Richard had insisted it stay right there, on its little pedestal, a silent, ugly sentinel. "It's about potential, Maddie," he'd said, his voice already thin as paper. "What's hidden inside is always more important than the shell." My hand, holding the dust cloth, trembled, not with age, not with weakness, but with a cold, clear purpose that felt like ice water flooding my veins. My gaze flickered toward the kitchen, where I could hear the faint hum of the expensive espresso machine Chloe had insisted they needed. They were still asleep, dreaming their shallow dreams of influence and acquisitions. My breath hitched. It wasn't a slip. It was a decision, a release. My fingers loosened, the muscles going slack in a performance of frailty I had perfected over 2 long years. The pomegranate tilted, teetered for a dramatic second and then fell. The sound wasn't as loud as I'd expected. It was a sharp, definitive crack, like a bone snapping, followed by the dry skittering of ceramic shards across the hardwood floor. I held my breath, waiting, for a shout from upstairs, for the thunder of footsteps, for Chloe to appear, her face a mask of fury, ready to berate the clumsy old woman who'd finally broken the ugly thing. Silence. Nothing. I was so irrelevant, they hadn't even registered the sound of their inheritance beginning to shatter. A bitter smile touched my lips.
Of course.
I knelt, my knees protesting with genuine complaint this time, my fingers, careful to avoid the sharpest edges, sifted through the wreckage. Red and purple fragments lay scattered like the remnants of a cheap crown, but inside, there was nothing. No key, no rolled-up document, no futuristic-looking hard drive. My heart sank, a cold, leaden weight in my chest. Was that it? Had I misunderstood him? Was his final message just a broken piece of pottery? The inside of the largest piece was hollow, coated with what looked like dust. A fine, grey, unremarkable powder. I touched it. It was gritty, almost like sand. Disappointment, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I had put all my faith in this, in him. And then I remembered. A rainy Tuesday, maybe 4 years ago, Richard, hunched over my phone, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, a rare, mischievous grin on his face. "Just installing a little something for you, Maddie," he'd mumbled. "An app for finding scorpions in the dark. You never know." I'd laughed, swatting his hand away. "Richard, we live in a gated community in California, not a desert." He had just winked. Preparedness is the art of the sane man in an insane world. My own phone felt alien in my hand as I pulled it from my apron pocket. I scrolled past the apps Chloe had installed for me, social media I never looked at, brain games meant to keep me sharp, until I found it. An icon of a simple black square with a purple light beam. I'd never once opened it. My hand shook for real this time as I tapped the screen. The phone's camera activated, but the world it showed was washed in a strange violet light. I pointed it at the largest shard, the one coated in that fine grey dust. and the world shifted. The dust wasn't dust. It ignited on my screen, a nebula of glowing, phosphorescent green. It wasn't random, it was a pattern, a complex, cryptographic key, a language of symbols and numbers that writhed like living things under the black light. My breath caught in my throat. It was beautiful and terrifying, the secret heart of a star spilled onto my living room floor. Richard, you magnificent, crazy bastard. As I moved the phone, another set of symbols glowed fainter, separate from the main key. Not a code, but letters. An address for a law firm in a town I'd never heard of, in Wyoming. The game hadn't just begun. I was already on the board. The bus ride to Wyoming felt like shedding a skin. With every mile that separated me from the oppressive, air-conditioned perfection of Leo's house, I felt more like Madison Hayes and less like the ghost who haunted it. The manicured lawns of California bled into the vast, brutal emptiness of the high desert, and then into the stoic, lonely mountains of Wyoming. The air that hissed from the bus vents smelled of diesel and distance. It was the smell of freedom. The law firm of Abernathy and Sons was a lie. The faded gold leaf on the window promised a legacy, but the dust on the sills and the single weary name on the directory told the truth. There was only Abernathy. The Sons were likely long gone, having fled for brighter, more profitable cities. The office smelled of old paper, leather polish, and time itself. It was a scent I recognised, the scent of secrets kept for a long, long time. Mr. Abernathy was carved from the same old wood as his desk. His face was a roadmap of disappointments and hard-won battles, his eyes a pale, watery blue that seemed to have seen every form of human greed and folly. He looked at me over the top of his half-moon glasses, his expression a well-practiced mixture of professional courtesy and profound scepticism. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice a dry rustle, "you called?" It wasn't a question. "I did," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I sat in the worn leather chair opposite him. It sighed under my weight. He steepled his fingers. They were long, bony, and spotted with age. "You said on the phone it was regarding your late husband, Richard Hayes. I was his attorney for a brief period, a very long time ago. Estate planning, it was all quite straightforward. Your son, Leo, was the primary beneficiary. You were well provided for." He said the last part with a hint of doubt, his eyes taking in my simple dress, my worn-out handbag. He was already drawing conclusions. He saw a frail, possibly confused old woman, perhaps chasing a misremembered inheritance. "Richard was a man of layers, Mr. Abernathy." A dry chuckle escaped his lips. "That's a polite way of putting it. Richard was a shark who happened to learn to walk on land. No offence." "None taken," I said. He would have considered it a compliment. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly into a square. On it, I had meticulously copied the glowing symbols from the pomegranate shard. I hadn't dared to bring my phone to risk a digital trail. I slid the paper across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. He picked it up with a sigh, as if indulging a child. His eyes scanned it. He frowned. He looked at me, then back at the paper. He took off his glasses, polished them with a handkerchief, and put them back on, leaning closer. The skepticism in his eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else. A flicker of recognition. A reluctant spark of interest. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice losing some of its dismissive edge. "From a pomegranate," I said simply. He stared at me, his mouth a thin line. He was deciding if I was senile or telling an impossible truth. He ran a finger over the symbols I had drawn. "He actually did it," he whispered, more to himself than to me.
The crazy son of a gun. He actually did it.
Michael, he rose without another word and walked to a towering wall of filing cabinets. He pulled open a drawer labelled GH and, after a moment of searching, retrieved a thick burgundy file. It was bound in string and bore a single name in stark black ink. Hayes, Richard. Provisional. He placed it on the desk with a thud that seemed to shake the dust from the air. Richard came to me about 6 years ago, Abernathy began, untying the string. His movements were slow, deliberate. He didn't want to update his will. He wanted to build a bomb. He opened the file and the scent of old paper intensified. He had me construct what is known in certain rather vindictive legal circles as an in terra rem trust. A terror clause. I prefer to call it what it is, a dead man's switch. He looked at me, his eyes now sharp and focused, all traces of condescension gone. His primary will, the one Leo has, is a shell. It grants Leo control over the public-facing assets, the house, a respectable portfolio, enough to make him feel like a king. But it's a facade. The true estate, the vast majority of it, Mrs. Hayes, wealth that would make your son's current lifestyle look like a child's allowance, is locked in this trust. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silent, dusty office. The trust has a single, brutal condition, Abernathy continued, his gaze unwavering. It is set to transfer 100% of the true estate, every last patent, every offshore account, every hidden share, to a secondary beneficiary. You. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the air between us. But only, he added, his voice dropping, upon verifiable moral failing on the part of the primary heir. The clause is specific. It requires an act of profound betrayal, financial malfeasance, emotional cruelty, criminal negligence. Richard gave me a list of possibilities. It reads like a catalogue of the 7 deadly sins. But I thought of the forged signature on that loan document, the plan to ship me off to a state-run facility, the casual cruelty of being ignored, erased. I had the proof. I had the moral failing. A wave of triumph, cold and fierce, washed over me. So it's done, I said, my voice a whisper. I can prove it. Abernathy held up a hand. The weary look was back in his eyes. Not so fast. Richard wasn't just a shark, Mrs. Hayes. He was a master of games. He loved locks and keys. This trust, this bomb, it requires 2 keys to activate it. 2 separate cryptographic authentications that must be entered simultaneously. Without both, that file, he gestured to the burgundy folder, is just a very expensive piece of paper. He slid the paper I'd given him back towards me. This is the first key. You have it. Congratulations. And the second? I asked, my throat suddenly dry. Abernathy leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking in protest. He looked at me with an expression that was almost pitying. That, he said with a deep sigh, is where the cruelty of your late husband truly shines. The second key is not in a place, it is with a person. It is held by Richard's estranged younger brother, Jacob. The name landed like a stone in the quiet room. Jacob. I hadn't heard his name spoken in over 30 years. Richard had excised him from our lives as cleanly as a surgeon removing a tumour. All I knew were the bitter fragments of a story, a business deal gone sour, accusations of theft, a family schism so deep and hateful it was never, ever to be mentioned. Richard didn't make anything easy, Abernathy murmured, as if reading my thoughts. Not even his revenge. He knew you'd have to go to Jacob. He's counting on it. He's making you walk through the fire of his own past to claim your future. The triumph I'd felt moments before curdled into a cold, hard knot of dread. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a pilgrimage, and Richard had just sent me into the heart of the desert to face a ghost he had created. Nevada was a different kind of emptiness, not the majestic loneliness of Wyoming, but a scorched, desperate void. The bus spat me out in a town that was little more than a sun-bleached scar on the landscape. The address Abernathy had given me led to a trailer park on the edge of town, a place called Oasis Palms. It was a cruel joke. The only palms were a few pathetic, dying trees, and the only oasis was the shimmering heat haze rising from the asphalt. This was a place where dreams came to die. Finding Jacob Hayes wasn't difficult. I just had to ask for the angriest man in the park. A woman with a leathery tan and a cigarette dangling from her lips pointed a thumb toward a rusted airstream at the far end of the lot. "That's Jake's. Don't expect a welcome mat." The trailer was a relic. Its silver skin, oxidized and dull, propped up on cinder blocks. The ground around it was a graveyard of dead machinery and empty bottles. As I approached, a man emerged from beneath the decrepit pickup truck, wiping greasy hands on an even greasier rag. He was younger than Richard would have been, but life had been much harder on his face. His hair was a wild grey mane, and his eyes, when they landed on me, were chips of flint. They were Richard's eyes, but stripped of all their cleverness and left with only the bitterness. "What do you want?" he grunted. His voice was gravel. "Jacob?" I asked, my own voice feeling small in the oppressive heat. "Jacob Hayes?" He straightened up slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took me in. He saw my clean clothes, my handbag, my city softness. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face, a rictus of contempt. "Well, I'll be damned. The queen of the manor. Come to see how the other half lives?" He tossed the rag onto the hood of the truck. "A little far from your gated paradise, aren't you, Madison?" He knew who I was. The shock must have shown on my face. "Oh, I keep tabs," he sneered. "Saw the wedding announcement for the granddaughter. Looked like a real classy affair. Bet the canapés cost more than I make in a month. You were always his accomplice, weren't you? Living the high life, wearing the pearls he bought with other people's money, my money?" "Jacob, that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" he spat, taking a step closer. He smelled of sweat, oil and stale beer. "Did Richie's ghost send you? Did you come to gloat some more? Tell me how wonderful your life is, built on the foundations of the company he stole from me." I didn't defend Richard. I didn't argue. What would be the point? The wound between these brothers was decades old, and it had festered into a deep, unchangeable hatred. So I just stood there, under the brutal Nevada sun, and I listened. He told me everything. He paced in the dirt in front of his trailer, his hands carving the air as he relived every slight, every betrayal. He talked about their father's workshop, how they had started a small engine repair business together. He talked about Richard's ambition, how it grew like a cancer, twisting their partnership. He spoke of the day Richard forced him out, using legal loopholes and financial trickery that Jacob, a simple mechanic, could never have understood. "He ruined me," Jacob said, his voice cracking with a pain that was still raw after all these years. "He didn't just take the business. He took my name. He told everyone I was a thief, a drunk, incompetent. He painted me as the villain in his grand story of success. And you stood right by his side. You cashed the checks, you wore the diamonds, you never once asked where it all came from." He was right. I hadn't. I had loved a version of Richard, the charming, brilliant man who brought me flowers and called me Maddie. I had willfully ignored the shark. Finally, when his fury had exhausted itself, leaving him breathing heavily in the dust, I spoke. I need your help. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a horrible sound, dry and broken.
My help? You've got to be kidding me. After all this, you come to me for help.
I explained in the simplest terms I could about the trust, about the 2 keys, about Leo and what he had done. I told him this was a chance for justice. His laughter died, replaced by a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes.
Justice?
He scoffed.
You mean revenge? Richie's last little game from beyond the grave, and he wants to use me as a pawn, again.
He stared at me, his gaze travelling from my face down to my simple shoes and back up again.
You want me to help you take down Richard's spoiled brat? The boy who got everything I should have had. I'd rather pour gasoline on the whole thing and watch it burn.
I stood my ground, my heart a cold stone in my chest. There must be something you want. He was silent for a long time, studying me. The gears of a bitter mind were turning, searching for the most painful, most impossible price. All right, Your Highness, he said at last, the sneer returning to his lips. You want my key, you can have it. For a price. He leaned in close, his voice a low, venomous whisper. $500,000. Cash. You get me $500,000, and I'll give you whatever little trinket Richie left with me. We both know you don't have it. We both know your son holds the purse strings. So go ask him for it, go on. It'll be the last laugh I have at Richard's expense. He knew it was impossible. He had named a price designed to humiliate me, to send me crawling back to the very people I was trying to escape. He wanted to watch me fail. He turned his back on me then and slid back under the truck, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. I stood there for a moment in the suffocating heat, the man's bitter laughter echoing in my ears. I had walked through the fire of Richard's past, just as he'd intended, and I had been burned. The bus ride back was a journey through a fog of despair. The hope that had carried me to Wyoming and Nevada had evaporated, leaving behind the dry grit of failure. When I unlocked the door to my small apartment, the silence that greeted me was different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was the sound of a closing trap. It was waiting for me on the small table by the door, placed where I couldn't possibly miss it. A thick, cream-coloured envelope bearing the crisp, embossed logo of a major corporate bank. My name and address were printed in stark, impersonal letters. It felt cold to the touch. My hands trembled as I tore it open, a far cry from the calculated tremor I'd used to break the pomegranate. The language inside was dense, legalistic, but the meaning was brutally clear. This letter serves to formally confirm your legal status as personal guarantor for the business loan issued to Luminate Innovations LLC under the direction of CEO Leo Hayes. As per the signed and notarized documents on file, you have personally secured the full loan amount of $5 million, collateralized against your personal assets. $5 million. The number seemed to leap off the page, a monstrous, unimaginable figure. The shaky, frail signature I had so cleverly produced, my one piece of evidence, my secret weapon, had been accepted without question. It was now a legally binding chain, shackling what little the world thought I owned to Leo's sinking ship. The trap had been sprung. My act of defiance had become my cage. I sank into a chair, the letter crinkling in my clenched fist. The walls of the room seemed to be closing in, the air thick and hard to breathe. I was no longer just a wronged mother. In the eyes of the law, I was a willing participant in my son's gamble, and I was about to go down with him. Later that evening, the sound came. A cheerful, tinny notification chime from the tablet Chloe insisted I keep on my nightstand. I never used it, but she liked to send me family photos, a perfunctory performance of a caring daughter-in-law. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something compelled me to pick it up. The screen glowed to life. It was a notification from a social media app called TikTok. A new video had been posted by Chloe. My thumb, moving as if of its own accord, tapped the screen. The video exploded into life, a riot of sound and colour. It was Chloe, her face perfected by a digital filter, grinning into the camera. She was sitting in the passenger seat of a car, the interior a gleaming expanse of cream-coloured leather. The camera panned over to Leo, who gave a smug wave from the driver's seat. Then it swept outside, showing the sleek, metallic grey body of a brand-new, obscenely expensive sports car. A song with a heavy, obnoxious beat pounded from the tablet's speakers. Chloe held up a champagne flute, winking at the camera. The caption, a string of hashtags, glowed at the bottom of the screen. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag hard work pays off. Hashtag level up. Hashtag couple goals. Hashtag new wheels. They were celebrating. Celebrating the $5 million loan. My $5 million chain. They were toasting their success with champagne in a new car that my supposed assets had paid for, while I sat in a silent room with a letter that threatened to take everything. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it stole my breath, the casual public flaunting of their fraud. I watched the video loop again and again, the smug look on Leo's face. Chloe's vapid, self-satisfied grin, the gleam of the car, the pounding music. And as I watched, the despair in my chest began to recede, replaced by something else. Something cold and sharp and clear as glass. Richard's words from Abernathy's office echoed in my mind. Verifiable moral failing. A profound betrayal. They weren't just celebrating, they weren't just being cruel. They were creating evidence, they were documenting their own greed, their own hubris, and broadcasting it to the world for anyone to see. This video, this digital ghost of their gloating, wasn't the final nail in my coffin. It was a hammer, and they had just handed it to me. I looked down at the bank letter in my hand, then back at the glowing screen. They were two sides of the same coin, the crime and the proof. A cold smile touched my lips, the first genuine one in a very long time. They thought they were dancing in the winner's circle. They had no idea. They were just dancing on their own graves. The letter from the bank felt different in my hands than the other mail. It wasn't flimsy like a circular or soft like a greeting card. It was crisp, official, and heavy with the kind of importance that chills the blood. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. It was the confirmation, the legal, binding proof that my son had mortgaged my life to save his own. I sat at my small kitchen table. the one Chloe had picked out because it was unobtrusive, and let the envelope lie there, a white rectangle of betrayal. For a long time I just looked at it. The initial shock, the raw wound of it, had already scabbed over. What was left was a cold, hard clarity. The time for grief was over. The time for waiting was over. Richard's voice echoed in my memory, not with the warmth of a husband, but with the chilling precision of a strategist. When they deny you a seat at the table, my love, you don't ask for a new chair. You burn their world to the ground and build your own table from the ashes. The game had begun. My performance started the next morning. It was subtle at first, a delicate seeding of chaos into their carefully curated world. I chose my moment. Chloe was on her tablet at the main house's breakfast bar, scrolling through designs for her new kitchen extension, a project funded by my future destitution. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips pursed. She looked every bit the successful modern matriarch. I shuffled in, wearing the faded floral housecoat she despised, my hand trembling just so. "Chloe, dear," I said, my voice pitched a little higher, a little more fragile than usual. "I was just thinking about that paper I signed for Leo the other day." She didn't look up from her tablet. "It's handled, Madison. Don't worry your head about it." "Oh, I'm not worried," I said, feigning a light, airy confusion. I fiddled with the sash on my housecoat. I can't seem to recall the amount. Was it a lot of money, dear? I do hope Leo is being careful. Richard always said you have to be so careful with borrowed money." Finally, she looked up, her eyes flashing with impatience. It was a minuscule reaction, a slight tightening around her mouth, but I saw it. I logged it. "It was a significant amount, yes," she said, her tone clipped. "It's business, Madison. Very complex. Leo is a genius. You wouldn't understand." "Oh, I'm sure I wouldn't," I chirped, smiling my most vacant smile. "My old head gets so muddled with numbers these days. A genius, you say? That's wonderful." I shuffled back to my own small apartment, feeling the burn of her dismissive gaze on my back. Inside, alone, my smile vanished. My posture straightened. I went to the small desk in the corner and made a note on a pad of paper. 8:47 a.m. First mention. Reaction. Annoyance. Condescension. Stage 1 initiated. An hour later, I was back. I forgot my reading glasses. As Chloe was directing a landscaper outside the large picture window, I called out to her. "Chloe, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you." She turned, her face a mask of strained politeness for the benefit of the worker. "What is it, Madison?" "That loan," I said, my voice filled with manufactured anxiety. "You said it was a business loan. Was it from a bank?" I remember Richard had a terrible time with First National back in '98. They have such hidden fees, you know. I hope Leah read the fine print. I could see a muscle twitch in her jaw. The landscaper was looking on, an impassive witness to this little family tableau. "Everything is fine, Madison," she said through a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a private lender, very reputable. Now, if you'll excuse me," she turned her back on me, a clear, sharp dismissal. I returned to my cage, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. 9:55 a.m., second mention. Reaction. Visible irritation, public embarrassment, pressure increasing. This was a war of attrition, a psychological siege. I was the ghost at their feast, a constant, nagging reminder of the crime they thought they had committed in secret. The Nanny cam, one of Chloe's own paranoid installations, became my private theatre. She'd had it installed in my living room to make sure I was safe. which was her coded way of saying, make sure I wasn't getting into trouble or becoming an inconvenience. She never imagined I knew how to access the feed from the old tablet Richard had left me. That night, after my third inquiry about the loan, this time wondering aloud if it would affect Stella's trust fund, I settled in to watch the fallout. The image was grainy, the audio slightly muffled, but their anger was crystal clear. They were in their cavernous living room, the one with the 20-foot ceilings and art that was worth more than my entire life savings. Leo was pacing, running his hands through his hair. Chloe was sitting rigidly on a white sofa, a glass of wine held in a white-knuckled grip. 3 times today, Leo. 3 times. Chloe's voice was a venomous hiss. She keeps asking about the loan. Was it a lot? Did you read the fine print? It's like she knows. It's like she's doing it on purpose to drive me insane. She doesn't know anything, Chloe. Relax, Leo snapped, his own voice tight with stress. She's a confused old woman. That's the whole point. That's why this worked. Then why does she keep bringing it up? Today, in front of the landscaper, she's making me look like a monster who can't control her senile mother-in-law. It's not about you. God, can you make anything not be about you for 1 second? Leo exploded. I have investors breathing down my neck, a launch deadline in 6 weeks, and a $5 million hole I just plugged with my mother's entire net worth. Forgive me if I'm not terribly concerned about your reputation with the yard guy. Your mother's net worth is now our net worth, she shot back, her voice like ice. Or rather, it's the collateral that's keeping my lifestyle from evaporating. The lifestyle you promised me. So yes, I am concerned. If she keeps acting strangely, if she starts talking to someone, to one of her old biddy friends, she has no friends left. You made sure of that, remember? You decluttered her address book along with her photo albums. A cold silence fell between them. I watched, my face impassive. I felt nothing but a distant, clinical satisfaction. They were turning on each other. The seeds I had planted were sprouting in the fertile ground of their guilt and paranoia. They were watering them with their own fear. Richard had taught me that the most effective poison isn't one that kills the body, but one that infects the mind. The next day, I escalated. I waited until they were both in the kitchen, a rare moment of tense truce. I wandered in, holding the bank's letter, which I had carefully opened and resealed. "Oh, good, you're both here," I said, my voice trembling, with what I hoped looked like dawning horror. "I got this letter from a bank. It has so many zeros on it, Leo. I don't understand." I held it out to him, my hand shaking. "It says I'm a guarantor, is that right? I just hope this money wasn't for that venture thing, dear. Richard always said those technology startups were like throwing money into a bonfire. He said they burn bright and fast, but in the end all you're left with is ash." The silence in the room was absolute. I had quoted Richard directly, a phrase he'd used specifically about Leo's early failed business ideas. It was a direct hit. I watched the colour drain from Leo's face. Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. The carefully constructed mask of control completely shattered. For a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated fear in her eyes. The fear that I wasn't confused at all. The fear that I knew. Leo snatched the letter from my hand. "It's a formality, Mum," he said, his voice strained. "A copy for your records. It's all part of the corporate structure. Don't worry about it." I let my face crumple, as if on the verge of tears. "But all those zeros, Leo." "I'll handle it," he yelled, his composure finally breaking. He turned and stormed out of the room. Chloe remained, frozen, just staring at me. I looked back at her, letting my gaze seem lost and bewildered, before shuffling away, the picture of pathetic, harmless senility. The chaos was taking root beautifully. They were trapped in a cage of their own making, and I was simply rattling the bars, day by day. While they were consumed by their rising panic, I was moving. My actions were quiet, precise, and invisible to them. The key was an account Richard had set up years ago, a digital fortress with a name that was both a private joke and a solemn promise. Persephone. Persephone, the queen of the underworld, who lived in darkness for half the year, but always returned, bringing life back to the world. Accessing it was a ritual. It wasn't a simple password. It was a sequence of questions on a secure, standalone device he'd left me, a device that looked like a simple e-reader. What was the name of the stray dog we found on our honeymoon? Bacchus. What street was our first apartment on? Elm, but the tree was an oak. What was the secret ingredient in my mother's apple pie? A pinch of black pepper. With each correct answer, a memory bloomed sharp and clear. I could smell the salt air of our honeymoon, feel the splintered wood of our first front door, taste the surprising spice in his mother's baking. It was his way of ensuring only I could pass, of weaving his love into the very fabric of his cold, hard plan. The final prompt appeared on the screen. My last promise to you. The answer was a single word. Justice. The screen flickered and resolved into a secure trading interface. It was clean, minimalist, showing a portfolio that was mostly dormant, a collection of long-held assets Richard had called his doomsday fund. My eyes scanned the list until I found the one I was looking for. Avum Biotech, a pre-IPO firm we had invested a small sum in decades ago, on a tip from a friend. Richard had believed in their research on cellular regeneration. He called it the science of second chances. I clicked on it. The current valuation per share was astronomical. I took a deep, steadying breath and executed the sell order. Not all of it, just one single solitary share. The confirmation screen flashed. Sale executed. Proceeds $1,207,451.38. The wire transfer to a newly opened anonymous account was instantaneous. $1.2 million. It wasn't just money, it was ammunition. It was the fuel for the fire I was about to light. The flight back to Nevada was different from the first. The first time I had been a supplicant, a widow searching for a path. This time I was an emissary of fate. I watched the green, manicured landscapes of California give way to the stark, sun-bleached plains of the desert. It felt appropriate. I was leaving the world of illusions and entering the world of hard, unforgiving truths. I found Jacob in the same place, a tin can of a trailer baking in the relentless sun. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer and regret. He looked at me with the same weary suspicion as before, but this time there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He must have wondered why I was back.
You're persistent, I'll give you that.
He grunted, gesturing to a wobbly chair. I didn't sit. I walked to the small table and placed a briefcase on it. I opened it and took out a single, neatly wrapped stack of $100 bills. $10,000. I pushed it towards him. For your time, I said. He eyed the cash, then me.
That's a lot of time. You didn't have that kind of money last time.
Things change, I said simply. Then I took out a second item from the briefcase, a cashier's check. I laid it on the table, but kept my hand on it. He leaned forward to read the amount, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. On, $500,000. His breath hitched. The greed was plain on his face, a raw, ugly thing. He reached for it, his rough fingers brushing against mine. I didn't pull away. I let him touch it, feel the reality of it. "It's yours, Jacob," I said, my voice low and even. "Richard wanted you to have it, but not as a bribe, as a retainer, for your services in the pursuit of justice." I slowly pulled the check back, just out of his reach. "First," I said, "you need to understand what kind of justice we are pursuing." I laid the next item on the table. It was a high-quality copy of the loan guarantee agreement. I pointed to the signature line. "This is supposed to be my signature," I said. "Look at it." He squinted, picking it up. He saw the shaky, pathetic forgery, the signature of a frail, feeble old woman. He saw the name, Madison Hemsley, scrawled by the hand of a thief. "My son Leo had me sign this. He told me it was a permission slip for a medical procedure." Jacob's expression hardened. The greed in his eyes was being replaced by something else, something darker, something I recognized. "That signature," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "made me the sole guarantor for a $5 million loan to save his failing company. It leveraged everything I have left in this world, everything Richard and I built." I let that sink in. The air in the trailer grew heavy. Then I took out my final piece of evidence, a small, discreet digital audio recorder. "And this," I said, "is what his lovely wife, Chloe, plans for my future, now that they have my money." I pressed play. Chloe's crisp, cruel voice filled the small, hot space.
"A nice state-run facility. Clean, efficient. We can't have her wandering around the main house when investors are over. And all her old junk, the photo albums, the clutter, it has to go."
It's a matter of branding, of moving forward. The recording ended. The silence that followed was profound. Jacob stared at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. He looked at the forged document. He looked at the check. Then he looked at me, and for the first time I saw it clearly. A flicker of Richard's cold fire in his eyes. The same ruthless intelligence. The same intolerance for weakness and betrayal. The family resemblance was not in the shape of their faces, but in the steel of their souls. "Richard didn't want simple revenge, Jacob," I said softly, driving the point home. "Revenge is messy, it's emotional. Richard was never emotional about business. He wanted justice, a perfectly balanced, ice-cold reckoning. He wanted a lesson they would never forget, a lesson etched into the very foundation of their lives." I explained the trust, the in terrorem clause, the two keys. I explained how Leo and Chloe's greed, their cruelty, their final act of forgery, was not their victory, but the trigger for their own self-destruction. They had not outsmarted Richard. They had walked directly into the trap he had spent his last year on Earth building for them. Jacob was silent for a long time. He looked out the grimy window, at the shimmering heat rising from the asphalt. "My brother," he said, his voice raspy. "He was a magnificent bastard. I hated him for half my life, but I never for 1 second thought he was a fool." He turned back to me. The bitterness was gone, replaced by a grim sense of purpose. He reached into a locked footlocker under his cot and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a key. Not a normal key, but a piece of machined steel, intricate and strange, its head shaped like a stylized H. It was identical to the one I held. He placed it on the table next to the forged document. The second key. The final lock. He told me a woman would come one day, Jacob said.
He said I'd know it was her, because she'd have the fire of his wife and the patience of a saint. He said I wasn't to give her the key until she'd proven that the lesson was necessary. He looked at the recorder and the forged signature. The lesson is necessary. He pushed a key towards me. I pushed the check for $500,000 towards him. Our hands did not touch. It was a clean transaction. I stood up, placing the second key carefully in my briefcase. I left the $10,000 in cash on the table. I didn't need to say thank you. He didn't need to say good luck. We were instruments of a will far more powerful and patient than our own. As I walked away from the trailer, the two keys felt heavy in my bag. They were not just metal. They were the weight of a life's work, the fulcrum on which an entire dynasty would be broken. The silent gambit was over. All the pieces were in place. Now, all that was left was to set the date for the banquet and watch them feast on the consequences of their own choices. The air in Crestwood Manor was thick with the scent of money and desperation, a cloying mix of expensive perfume, seared scallops, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. My son's fear, mostly. He was hosting a make-or-break banquet for his final round of investors, and the entire production was designed to scream success. Crystal glasses chimed. A string quartet played softly in the grand foyer, and men in tailored suits spoke in low, confident tones about market caps and disruption. It was the same ballroom where I had been relegated to a seat by the kitchen, the same polished floors that had reflected my humiliation. Tonight, however, I was confined to my suite, the in-law apartment that was more of a gilded cage. Leo found me sitting on the edge of the perfectly made bed. He was vibrating with a nervous energy, his smile stretched a little too wide across his face. "Mom," he said, his voice a forced, cheerful boom. "There you are, all ready for your quiet night in?" He surveyed my simple grey dress, the one Chloe had once called funerary chic, and nodded in approval. It was appropriately invisible.
"I'm fine, Leo. I hope your evening goes well," I said, my voice practiced in its soft, reedy tone, the sound of a woman who had accepted her place in the background. "It will. It has to," he said, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. He was wearing a new watch, a sliver of platinum and sapphire that must have cost more than the car Richard and I had driven for 20 years. A celebratory purchase, no doubt, funded by the loan he'd secured with my name, my forged name. "Tonight is critical," he continued, leaning in as if sharing a state secret. "These are the last holdouts, the big fish. Once they're in, we're not just solvent, we're a dynasty." He puffed out his chest. "So please, for me, just stay in your room. No wandering. We can't have any distractions. We'll bring you a plate later, I promise." He reached out and patted my head. A brief, dismissive gesture one reserves for a well-behaved dog or a slightly dusty piece of furniture. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was an act of ownership, of containment. I felt the familiar hot prickle of shame, but this time it was different. It wasn't a wound. It was fuel.
I looked up at him, my eyes wide and guileless, and gave him the meek, compliant smile I had perfected over the last 2 years. A smile that cost him everything. "Of course, dear," I murmured. "I wouldn't dream of getting in your way." He smiled, satisfied. "That's my girl." He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. The sound of a cage being locked. He had no idea I was the one holding the key. I waited a full minute, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I stood up and walked not to the television, but to the large, ornate wardrobe. Tucked behind a row of bland, beige cardigans was a small, dark tablet. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a grid of 16 different camera feeds from the ballroom and foyer below. A little gift from Mr. Abernathy's security consultant, installed under the guise of a routine fire safety inspection last month. I watched Leo stride into the ballroom, accepting handshakes, his face a mask of triumphant confidence. I saw Chloe, draped in shimmering emerald silk, laughing a little too loudly at an investor's joke, her hand resting possessively on Leo's arm. They were a power couple, a brand, and I was the embarrassing secret they kept locked away upstairs. I settled into a velvet armchair, the tablet propped on my lap. I watched them work the room. I watched the waiters serve champagne. I watched the first course being delivered. I heard, faintly through the floor, the murmur of the crowd and the soaring notes of the string quartet. I was a ghost at their feast, a silent, all-seeing eye. I tracked the bank officials from Sterling National, the ones who had so easily approved the $5 million loan against my assets. They were seated at a table of honor, looking pleased with themselves. I saw the lead investors, a notoriously ruthless group from a Silicon Valley venture capital firm, watching Leo with predatory stillness. They weren't just here for a party. They were here to see if my son had the killer instinct required to make them richer. An hour bled into another. I ate nothing. The plate they had promised never arrived, just as the slice of cake at Stella's party had never arrived. The omissions were always the most telling. To them, I didn't just need to be hidden. I needed to cease to exist, even in their own minds. Finally, the moment arrived. The main course plates were cleared, the lights dimmed for the presentation, and a hush fell over the room. The string quartet fell silent. Leo walked towards the stage at the far end of the ballroom, his steps confident, his silhouette framed by the enormous projection screen behind him. It currently displayed the sleek, meaningless logo of his company, Innovate. A wave of applause, led enthusiastically by Chloe, rippled through the hall. Leo took the microphone from its stand, basking in the spotlight. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and amplified. "Thank you all for being here tonight, for believing in the future." On my tablet, I zoomed in on his face, the sheen of sweat on his brow, the feverish light in his eyes. The look of a man who believed he had won. "What we are building at Innovate isn't just a company," he declared. "It's a paradigm shift, a new way of thinking about connectivity, about legacy." He was in his element, spinning a web of jargon and ambition. I listened to him talk about growth and synergy and scalable solutions. I watched the investors nod, their faces impassive, but interested. He was selling them a dream, a beautiful, hollow edifice built on a foundation of lies, a foundation I was about to dynamite. I minimized the camera feeds and pressed a single red icon on the tablet screen, a simple, pre-programmed command. Downstairs, as Leo took a dramatic pause before revealing his projected earnings, the lights in the manor didn't just dim further, They snapped off entirely for a single, heart-stopping second of pure blackness. A collective gasp swept through the room. Then they switched back on, but not to the warm, flattering glow of before. They came up as a harsh, sterile, unforgiving white, the kind of light you find in a hospital morgue or a laboratory. It bleached the colour from the room, turning the opulent affair into a stark, clinical tableau. Every head jerked towards the stage. The massive screen behind Leo, which was supposed to show a graph of exponential growth, flickered violently. The Innovate logo dissolved into digital static, then resolved itself into two simple, stark letters, 50 feet high, MH. Leo froze, his mouth half open. He stared at the initials behind him, his brain struggling to compute. He tapped the microphone. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. A little technical hiccup. But the crowd wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking past him. The venue manager, a portly man named Mr. Davison, who I'd had a very pleasant and lucrative chat with yesterday, walked calmly onto the stage. He moved with an unhurried purpose that was far more terrifying than panic. He gently took the microphone from Leo's stunned, unresisting hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davison said, his voice calm and steady, "my apologies for the interruption. There has been a change in tonight's programme. Please welcome the new owner of the Crestwood Manor." A single spotlight detached from the ceiling array and swung away from the stage, cutting a sharp white circle through the dim, sterile room. It swept over the tables of shocked faces, past the anxious bankers, past Chloe, whose hand was frozen halfway to her mouth. It moved down the central aisle, landing on the grand entrance doors at the far end of the ballroom. And then I walked through them. I had changed out of the grey dress of the Invisible Woman. I was now wearing a tailored, deep sapphire blue suit, the kind I used to wear to board meetings decades ago. My hair, which was usually pulled back in a loose grandmotherly bun, was now styled in a sleek, severe chignon. My steps were not the shuffling gait of a frail old woman. They were measured, deliberate, the heels of my shoes clicking with sharp authority on the polished marble floor. The spotlight followed me as I walked up the aisle. A sea of faces turned in my direction, their expressions a kaleidoscope of confusion, shock, and dawning recognition. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage, on my son. His face had crumpled. The confident master of the universe was gone, replaced by a pale, bewildered boy. Chloe looked as if she'd been turned to stone, her emerald dress suddenly looking cheap and garish in the harsh light. I walked up the small set of stairs to the stage and stood beside Mr. Davison. I took the microphone from his hand. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. I looked out at the assembled crowd, my eyes scanning the faces of the investors, the bankers, my family. "Good evening," I said. My voice was not the reedy murmur they were used to. It was the voice of a forensic accountant who had stared down criminals in courtrooms. It was clear, strong, and echoed with the cold, hard clarity of absolute truth. "I'm Madison Hayes. Thank you all for attending this event. At my newest acquisition, a tremor went through the room. 100 different conversations started and died at once, in a wave of whispers. I saw the lead investor lean over to his partner, his mouth forming the word, "Who?" I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the weight of my statement settle into the room. Leo stared at me, his jaw slack. "Mum, what is this? What are you doing?" I ignored him. My performance was for a different audience. At that moment, as if on cue, the grand side doors of the ballroom swung open. Mr. Abernathy, my lawyer, entered. He was not alone. He was followed by a team of 6 junior associates, 4 men and 2 women, all dressed in severe dark suits. They moved with the silent, efficient menace of sharks. Each one carried a stack of thick, spiral-bound folders. They split up, fanning out through the room like a well-drilled army, and began placing a folder in front of every single person. One was placed in front of Leo, who flinched as if it were a snake. Another was placed in front of Chloe, who stared at it, refusing to touch it. A folder for each of the stunned investors. A folder for each of the pale-faced bank officials from Sterling National. I waited until the last folder was delivered. I could hear the rustle of pages as the most curious or most nervous began to flip through them. "Please feel free to peruse those documents at your leisure," I said, my voice cutting through the rising murmur. The room fell silent again, all eyes on me. "They will corroborate everything I am about to say." I turned my gaze directly to Leo. The spotlight was gone. The harsh white light illuminated everything, leaving no shadows to hide in. "My son's company, Innovate," I began, my tone conversational, as if explaining a simple mathematical equation, "operates on a core patent for data compression. A rather brilliant piece of code, actually." I paused. "A patent which I own." A low gasp came from Chloe. Leo's eyes widened. At the investors' table, a man slammed his folder shut. "The company headquarters," I continued, my voice unhurried, "the sleek glass building downtown you all visited this afternoon, is housed in a commercial property." Another beat. "A property which I own." The air was crackling now. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a corporate execution. I looked over at the house where Leo and Chloe lived, a sprawling mansion in the wealthiest part of town. My son himself lives in a beautiful home, a testament to his success. I let the irony hang in the air. A house which I own. I let that sink in. I could see the gears turning in the investors' heads. The bankers were starting to look physically ill. Leo was white as a sheet, his body trembling. "You see," I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more devastating. "My son's entire life, his entire career, his entire public persona has been a line of credit. An advance, if you will. An advance from a trust he was never meant to inherit." I turned to the crowd. "My late husband, Richard, was a brilliant man, but he was not a sentimental one. He saw the rot in our son's character long before I was willing to admit it. He did not believe in unearned wealth. He believed in tests. The entire Hayes family fortune was placed in a very specific, very peculiar kind of trust. Leo wasn't the beneficiary. He was the subject of an experiment. The trust was designed to give him the rope, to see if he would build a ladder with it, or a noose." My eyes found Leo's again. "You were given every advantage, every tool, and at every turn you chose the path of arrogance, of deceit, of cruelty." I raised my hand, and one of Mr. Abernathy's associates handed me a single sheet of paper from her folder. It was a high-resolution copy of the loan guarantee. My signature was circled in red. The final part of the test came a few weeks ago. When, desperate to cover your company's catastrophic losses, you needed a $5 million loan, and you secured it by forging the signature of your own mother, leveraging the last of what you believed were her assets. I held up the paper for all to see. "This document," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "was the last piece of the puzzle. the final disqualifying act under the Trust's primary protocol, a protocol Richard sardonically named the Moral Bankruptcy Clause. I let the term land. It was so perfectly, brutally Richard. The moment that fraudulent signature was notarized, the moment the funds were transferred, you failed the test. The clause was triggered. Your status as a potential heir was irrevocably voided. 100% of the Trust's assets, including every patent, every property, and every stock certificate you have ever used as collateral, transferred directly and immediately to me. I looked at Leo, whose face had collapsed into a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. You didn't inherit a fortune, Leo, I said, my voice now cold as ice. You inherited a test. Final chance to prove you were my husband's son, and you failed. As if to punctuate my words, a new sound began to fill the room, a faint, electronic chiming. It started with one phone, then another, then a dozen. Heads were bent over screens. On the massive display behind me, the letters MH dissolved and were replaced by a live feed. It showed me on stage from a low angle, clearly filmed on a phone. In the bottom corner, a small chyron read, "Live, the Crestwood Reckoning." The view count was already climbing into the thousands. The story was out. The public humiliation they had so feared was now happening, on a global scale, authored by me. The feast of consequences had been served, and it was being broadcast to the world. I stood there, not smiling, not gloating, simply observing the beautiful, terrible, and perfect symmetry of it all. The check had finally come due. The silence in Mr. Abernathy's office was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It was the opposite of the screaming silence I'd lived with for years in my little suite, the one filled with unspoken resentments and the loud hum of my own invisibility. This silence was heavy with consequence. On the polished mahogany table between us lay 2 stacks of paper. One was a meticulously prepared dossier detailing federal fraud charges, a future of courtrooms and cold, stark cells. The other was a single sheet of paper, my terms, typed in Abernathy's neat, unassuming font. Leo sat slumped in his chair, his face the colour of wet ash. The designer suit he wore, the one he'd probably bought with the first infusion of loan money, hung on him like a shroud. He stared at the papers, his eyes glassy, his entire being seeming to shrink with every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Chloe was a different story. She sat ramrod straight, her jaw so tight I thought her teeth might crack. Her fury was a shield, but I could see the terror behind it, flickering in her eyes like a faulty neon sign. "I don't understand," Leo finally whispered, his voice cracking. "Mom, why wouldn't you just send us to prison?" "This is," he trailed off, unable to articulate the nature of my proposition. He was looking for a category he understood: revenge, punishment, hatred. He couldn't find one. "Because prison would be an ending," I said, my voice even and calm. It felt strange in my own ears, like a bell that hadn't been rung in a decade. "Richard didn't want an ending for you, Leo. He wanted an education." Chloe scoffed, a dry, rattling sound. "Education? You've destroyed us. You've taken everything. This is a sick, twisted game from a bitter old woman." I looked at her, truly looked at her. perhaps for the first time since she'd entered my son's life. I didn't see the architect of my humiliation. I saw a frightened woman, stripped of her armor of brand names and social status, left with nothing but her own corrosive nature. I felt a pang, not of pity, but of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "No, Chloe," I said gently. "I haven't taken everything. I've left you with the most important things. You have each other. You have your health. And I am giving you a life, the exact life you had planned for me." Abernathy cleared his throat and picked up my single sheet of paper. He didn't need to read it. He had drafted it. But the performance was part of the lesson. "The terms are as follows," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "You will cede all legal challenges. In return, Mrs. Vance will not press charges. You will vacate your primary residence and all other properties within 72 hours. You will move into the in-law suite at the Crestwood property." I watched Chloe's face curdle. I remembered the damp chill of that suite, the way the air always smelled of mildew and regret. I remembered the single window that looked out onto a featureless brick wall. A constant, daily reminder of your confinement. "You will be granted a living allowance," Abernathy continued, his eyes fixed on Leo. "The exact sum you allocated for your mother's sundries, $750 a month. It will be managed by this firm and deposited into a new account. Your old accounts will, of course, be frozen and absorbed." Leo's head snapped up. $750 a month? We can't. That's not possible. "I managed," I said, my voice still quiet. "It requires budgeting. Furthermore," Abernathy went on, "as you will need to supplement this income, new employment has been arranged for you. Leo, you will assume the role of janitor for the commercial building you recently leased for your now defunct company. Your shift begins Monday at 6 a.m. The work is physical, the uniform is provided." I pictured Leo, my brilliant, ambitious son, pushing a grey janitorial cart down the gleaming marble hallways where he once strode like a king, his reflection staring back at him from the polished floors he was now required to scrub. Poetic, Richard would have called it. Abernathy turned his gaze to Chloe. "And Chloe, your community service, as we're calling it, will be managing the social media accounts for the county animal shelter. They are in desperate need of someone to help get their animals adopted. You will be responsible for taking and posting photographs, writing compelling captions, celebrating the beauty of mangy dogs and one-eyed cats instead of luxury handbags. Your first post is due by the end of the week." The venom in her eyes was pure. "You would have me touching filthy animals?" "They're only asking you to photograph them," I corrected softly. "And perhaps you'll find that their loyalty is far more valuable than the kind you buy." Finally, Abernathy mentioned Stella. The thought of my granddaughter brought the first real ache to my chest. "Stella has already secured a position at the local KFC. She told the manager she's saving up for community college. She seems like a very resourceful young woman." They chose my offer. Of course they did. The alternative was a certainty they couldn't bear. The lesson had begun. I stood in the grand foyer of Crestwood Manor one last time. The movers had come and gone, taking their furniture, their art, their life. All that was left was a cavernous, echoing space. The air was clean, stripped of the cloying scent of Chloe's expensive perfumes, and the faint metallic smell of Leo's ambition. The house no longer held the sound of their forced laughter, or the weight of their casual cruelty. It was just a house again, empty, vast. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps loud on the bare wood floors. I ran my hand along a marble countertop in the kitchen, where a sticky note from Chloe had once informed me that my personal items were cluttering the aesthetic. I stood in the living room where Leo had explained, with painstaking condescension, why I couldn't possibly understand the loan documents he needed me to sign. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the manicured lawn where they had hosted parties I was never truly invited to. I felt no joy, no thrill of victory. The adrenaline of the past few weeks had faded, leaving behind not a triumph, but a profound, hollowing sense of release. An unburdening. I realized with startling clarity that I wasn't keeping any of it. The house, the portfolio, the shell companies Richard had so brilliantly woven into a financial tapestry. It was all a cage, just a much larger, more ornate version of the one they had built for me. To live here, to rule over this empire of assets, would be to remain a prisoner of Richard's legacy and Leo's greed. It was never about the money. It was about the freedom to leave it behind. Abernathy had been surprised when I told him, "All of it, Madison, are you sure?" "Sell everything," I'd confirmed. "I want none of it." The profits, the staggering sums that had once defined my family's entire existence, were funneled into a single purpose. We created a foundation, a legal aid fund, with a very specific charter to provide aggressive pro bono legal representation for the elderly who were being financially abused by their own families. The Persephone Fund, I called it, a quiet nod to the myth of a queen who returned from the underworld, forever changed. My story wouldn't be a secret whispered in shame. It would be a shield for others. My final scene is not in a mansion surrounded by the spoils of war. It's here, in a slightly cramped economy seat, the drone of the engines a soothing hum. The plane is ascending, banking over the city, the grid of lights shrinking below until it's just a glittering abstraction. The world, which had once felt so small and suffocating, now spread out beneath me, a map of infinite possibilities. A flight attendant paused by my aisle, her smile warm and professional. "Can I get you anything before we reach cruising altitude, ma'am? Another water?" "I'm fine, thank you," I said. She nodded, then asked the simple, perfunctory question, "And where are we off to today?" I turned my head from the patchwork of clouds and looked out at the endless blue horizon. The weight of being Madison Vance, wife, mother, widow, victim, victor, all of it slipped away. I was just a woman on a plane, a ghost leaving her own haunting behind. A profound, bone-deep peace settled over me, a quiet I had never known. I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice light with a freedom I was only just beginning to understand. "I'm just going."